Welcome, everybody, to our episode. We're going to be talking about self-responsibility. Essentially, that's not my problem, and really explore self-responsibility. And how this is going to work is we're actually going to explore what it takes, the practice of metaphysical science over an 80-year span. So we're going to really explore it. So Betty, who's with us, she's 94 years old, and for at least the last 80 years, she has been practicing metaphysical science every day. It's part of the way she lives her life. So what we want to do is explore, well, what was that? What's been that journey? How does she come to where she is with it? And what does that really look like, this thing called practice? So that's what we're going to explore today. So welcome, Betty. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, good.
The reason this came up too, by the way, is that I wrote an article for Rethink Journal that's coming out in July. And it tells the story of how I've developed over the years.
So, right. So we're going to review this because there's some key points. And it isn't about treating metaphysical science like a pill. You know, you pull it into use when you got something going on that you want to clear up. It's called a practice, and it's every day. So we want to look at, well, what is that? So start us off. Let us know, how did you get into metaphysical science in the first place?
Well, as a little kid, my mother put me in Sunday school, in the Christian Science Sunday school. You know, she started me when I was 2, so I really didn't get to vote back then. But anyway, as the years went by, when I was a kid, I came up with realizing that I had something to do with the way my life went, that my behavior, my attitude, all of that really made an impact on everything else in my life. So it wasn't accidental that I was where I was, doing what I was doing, saying what I was saying, having the experiences I was having. So as the years went on, I became really kind of a serious student of metaphysics because it made sense to me, and at a very basic level, you know. So I had an attitude from an early time on that I couldn't go through life looking at things, and any problem that came up or anything I disagreed with or anything I didn't like or wasn't comfortable with, I couldn't cast it off and say, that's not my problem. Because I fundamentally, not sure how it all worked, but I fundamentally knew that if it was in my life, I had something to say about it. It was no accident.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the early part of things.
Okay. Now, help me understand a little bit about what is this whole thing about? So there's the practice of metaphysical science. What does that look like for you? And how has it evolved over your lifespan so far? So for the last 92 years, since you were 2 years old and started Christian Science.
I didn't do much when I was 2, believe me. But anyway, you know, I was certainly a student of Christian Science for many years, because my mother was a practitioner and my grandmother was a practitioner. So there was a lot of that in my life. And but when I was in my teens, I had a Sunday school teacher who had met Margaret Laird. And Margaret Laird had a slightly different approach to looking at what Mrs. Eddy had written. And it was a little different than my Sunday school teachers had presented to me. Mm-hmm. And I really, really got at a new level for me, that most everything was a matter of my own self-responsibility. Yeah. It was never anybody else's fault or it was never anybody else's credit. Whatever I had, I grew in my life out of who I was being. And I began to get that feeling about science early on.
Okay. So when you look at practice, what does practice mean to you? Just, when you say, well, the practice of science, what does that mean in your daily living?
Oh, well, the practice of science has to do with being fundamentally clear about what's true and what isn't. And it became clear to me pretty early on, like before I was 20. It became very clear to me that the stuff that I could see and feel and hear and taste and touch, all the physical sensation stuff, all of that was not actually what was going on. It was the way I was seeing what was going on. But there is a reality present. Like Shakespeare said, there's a divinity that shapes our ends. There's a reality present that has Betty show up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that has impact. Knowing that, I couldn't very well shrug off anything as if it shouldn't happen that way, as if it wasn't fair, as if it wasn't okay. I had to take a look and see, what was I believing that had to show up that way in my life? Because actually what was going on was good. It was all
capital G, right?
Yeah, it was all God being, if I could say it. It was a God idea, it was life, it was truth, it was principle, functioning. Mm-hmm. But my view of it from where Betty was standing, if I bought that picture, I had problems because the picture was not it.
Yeah.
And I discovered that pretty early on, and it made a huge difference. Because
do you remember? Do you have a story? Do you have a story about that? How that occurred for you? That was like, wow, if I do that, that causes some problems. But living this other way, with the practice, realizing that the view I see is the best view I've got. What's something that kind of cemented that for you?
Well, I really zeroed in on, I suppose I was in college at this time, but anyway, I really zeroed in on the fundamental things that Mrs. Eddy was teaching, which was, number one, all is infinite mind, and infinitely manifest and all that. And another one is that man is the reflection of God's being. So God in action is man. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother way to walk with than believing that you're a two-legged animal and that you happened upon the scene because of somebody's sex life, That's a whole different story. And I began to see that while that was the way the picture played out for me, I had a mother and a father, and I had sisters and brothers and stuff like that. The fact of me, the actual fact of existence, what was true, was that I lived and moved and had my being because there was a reality present that was the expression of the God idea. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes the difference in my human experience. When I was a little kid, I know in the book I wrote, when I was a little kid, like 7 years old, I think, when I got up with an earache and I went to Mom and said, I don't want to go to school today. And can I stay home? And she said, why don't you go get dressed and we'll think about that. So I went and got dressed, and Mother fixed my lunch, and my brother went off to school and all that sort of thing. And when I got to the door, I said, Mom, I really don't want to go to school. Do I have to go to school today? And she said, yes, I think you should go to school. But she says, you don't have to take the earache all the way to school with you. So I left carrying my lunch and walked to school. When I got to the playground, the earache was gone. And that's when I figured my mother knew something about things going on with me that I didn't know. And I wanted to find out what that was. And that's kind of how I got going.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there are these other things about one of the things that really stayed with me a lot was when I discovered this statement that Mrs. Eddy made about man has not a single quality underived from deity. And I thought, you mean I don't have anything I have to worry about? What the stuff making me up is all God stuff, the God idea, whole, perfect, all that. Wow. You know, that made a big difference. And that's why I discovered that all I had to do was stop and take a look at what had Betty rushing around doing things and let that alone.
And that didn't mean you didn't rush around doing things. You just didn't have it mean.
Yeah, it wasn't desperate. I did stuff, you know, I ate lunch and I did all the stuff that kids do. And by that time I was in college probably. And yeah, I did all the stuff normally, but I recognized that there was something else in charge besides Betty.
Mm-hmm.
And that something else had Betty present. So Betty can do whatever she needs to do.
Right.
But I didn't have to try to make over Betty.
Yeah.
What, you know, the action that needed to be taken was capable of being taken without Betty doing much about it.
Right. But when you look at your life, when you look at how things progress, so as you live your life, there are things that occur in your world that you did react to, that you did, you know, and so how did the stuff that was going on in your life affect your practice and vice versa? Because as you went on, you had, you know, Ardith, right? So you had her and she was actually going to be breached, but right before you gave birth, she flipped, right? So
Yeah.
there's that story. So say a little bit about that, because I think it's like all along the way,
Yep.
you have turned to what you know as those facts that you experienced, that you explored, that you kind of discovered for yourself very early on, that you keep returning to that. You keep being present to that or acknowledging that.
Yeah, and I had Margaret Laird as a practitioner at the time that Ardith was born. And when they told me in the labor room that the baby wasn't in a good position to be born, and they might have to do a cesarean section or something like that, you know, I said, what does that mean? The baby's not in the right position. They said, well, needs to flip over. She's upside down. And that was the best way they could describe it to me, you know. And they said sometimes they do that right when they're getting ready to be born. They flip over. It could happen. And so I said, okay. So, you know, I just thought, I told my husband, who was concerned about all this stuff, I said, why don't you go call Mrs. Laird? And he went down the hall to call Mrs. Laird. And while he was gone, there was this big bloop in my stomach. And then, before he got back and so on, before he'd gotten to call Margaret really. But anyway, the nurse was running to the elevator saying, Dr. Rogers, don't go, the baby's coming. It flipped over. And it was that quick. And then, so Ardith was born. So yeah, it seems to me like the truth of the matter is that every time a problem came up, every time something difficult or not average behavior, I'll say that, something out of the ordinary came up, I just relied more on, well, what's this all about?
Yeah.
I knew that nobody was going to be able to get in there and turn this baby around But I also knew that if the baby needed to be turned around, she'd turn around, and she did.
Yeah.
And she was born. It was fine. And she was
Right.
perfect. Everything was fine.
Yeah. So let's take this another step. Oops. Sorry. Let's take this another step. So as we look at your practice and your, and how that shows up for you, and I think it's emerging, the self-responsibility that goes hand in hand with practice.
Yep.
Is that how you would look at it? It's like if you're practicing science in every aspect, and that's what your go-to is when stuff shows up, that's you exercising that acknowledging that self-responsibility. Is that a good way to put that?
Yeah. And while I'm talking about it too, there is a larger sense of who I am that I didn't have the practitioner as some power off somewhere. I'm living my life whole, and all is infinite mind. So the appearance of a practitioner or somebody else to solve a problem for me, somebody to fix something that's broken, somebody to arrange something that needs to be taken care of, that's all me being infinite. I could just see that. It isn't Betty being infinite, but being that's being Betty is infinite in its nature. And it should look like whatever is needed anywhere, with no question.
Yeah.
So, Margaret used to say there's no need for gratitude. You don't sit around and be grateful for yourself, and there's nothing outside of the being that's being you. If you're the
so you could say there's everything to be grateful for. You could say there's nothing to be grateful for, and there's everything to be grateful for.
Yeah, and gratitude is the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So I want to keep exploring this, but I know that we also have some quotes in here that are, so this whole story is part of the upcoming Rethink magazine. That's a Rethink Quarterly that's put out by the Institute of Metaphysical Science. And in it, this is Betty's article that she's exploring. And we thought that this would be a really good way to explore the practice of metaphysical science and commitment and all of that. So on page 188 of your book, Mind is the Athlete, you say acknowledgement of divine facts is our body. And it seems like in every instance, when you're practicing, when in your life, something comes up and you acknowledge the divine fact that's present. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, well, that's what makes the difference. One of the things that I realized as I went along is that there are divine facts. There's a truth present constituting your being. And when you are living the acknowledgement of the facts, things go along exactly the way they should.
Right.
When you are believing that the thing you're looking at, the seen, heard, and felt, the feedback, the language, the stuff we look at 24/7 in front of us, when you think that stuff is causing you a problem, you've missed the boat. That stuff is reporting to you that where you're standing and what you're currently thinking is in that direction. And if you're a scientist, a student of science, you say, now, wait a minute. I know that stuff doesn't make anything happen. That's not causative.
Right.
But I know that the being that's being me right now is perfect. And that takes care of the belief, because then that shows up as the next feedback. And the next feedback.
Well, that brings me to the next quote from your book, which is permissiveness. Yeah. So with practice comes a lot of permissiveness with whatever shows up. And you say in your book, permissiveness involves conscious recognition of source as one causative, perfect presence.
Yep. Yep. And there's a big difference between being permissive and being passive about the language around you. Being permissive, you want to recognize that this is your best view of perfection right now. This is a view. The view doesn't run the show, but the perfection that's present runs it. And if you acknowledge that, you got a chance to have it all work out fine. If you are trying to ignore it or deny it, anything like that resists having it be just the way it looks. Anything that does that has it persist and makes the problem magnify. So I knew better than to do any of that. So it's the acknowledgement of present perfection, and then you leave it alone.
Right.
And amazingly enough, things work out.
Right. So if you
you are guilty of ignoring it or denying it or trying to get rid of it or hide it or shake it up or rearrange it or whatever, you're stuck with it. And it gets worse and messier and more uncomfortable and all the rest of that stuff because of the feedback, the stuff you're looking at, the stuff you're trying to figure out. It has no capacity to straighten itself out. It's just a point of view of something that's real. And if you don't leave it alone, it gets messier.
Right. And interestingly enough, you know the quote about you can't change the past?
All right.
So why do we try? Why do we consistently try? Because if you look at our life, we believe that what we're seeing is present.
I know.
Except for that really it's all in the past because it's a reflection of God's being, and a reflection can't be the now. It has to be the just now.
The reflection is immediate.
Right. Immediate, but it's still past.
No. When you see it,
still
it's
in
past.
the past.
But when it's present, it's God being.
Yes.
When I look in the mirror, it's past.
Right. So it's past that quickly.
But reflection is not past.
Okay.
Reflection is immediate moment.
Okay.
God present, God present, God present right now.
Okay, good. So when we start to play in the picture of our life and rearrange things and try to react to it, that's us changing the past or attempting to influence.
It's you buying into the picture as if it were causative.
I know, but in reality, it's all past stuff. There's no cause there.
That's right.
And when you can see it as the past, you can start to let it alone, maybe.
Yeah, when you recognize it as feedback, it's like sitting down and looking at leftovers from last night's dinner. When you recognize that it's last night's dinner, you don't look at it like I have to boil the carrots now. They've already been cooked. You just have to heat them up. It's it's like dealing with what's so. And when you deal with it as if it could make a difference, you're in trouble because it cannot make a difference.
Right.
It doesn't have the capacity to do that.
Right. So in your book, Mind is the Athlete, you also say passive behavior involves resignation and is a denial of responsibility in the matter of individual human activity. So passive behavior would leave you as a victim. Is that another way we could look at this?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I say when you look at it and think that it's real and that it made the problem and that you can fix it by moving it around or shifting it, that's you're in trouble.
Well, it might look better for a time, but you still have the propensity for that to continuously come back to.
Well, it shifts the responsibility out of you.
Right.
And when you do that, you have nothing you can do.
Right.
It gets worse.
Yeah. Okay.
Ultimately, yeah.
All right. So very good. Now,
so I had a quote here in this article, and I said, in the measure that this ongoing self-revealing was acknowledged as constitutional, like that's what makes me up.
Right.
That being itself being, the reflective presence of God, the God idea in action, life in
Right.
action, truth in action, principle functioning, all of that. When that's going on, then my freedom is a felt experience. If I rely on that felt experience, I'm relying on the past. I have to let it go and keep going.
Yeah.
It teaches me that, yes, this is the fact that's making the difference, not the feedback. So I can continue to leave the feedback alone instead of getting alarmed about it
Right.
or concerned about it. Do you see that?
Yes.
I don't know whether I'm saying that well.
No, it's good. I wish I had that quote to put up, but I don't. So that's a good quote. And if you want to review it, then you want to get the Rethink Quarterly and get a subscription so that you can get and read that article, because that's what we don't have right now.
Yeah, and since I've made all those statements about the feedback, the way I look at feedback, all of it, no matter what it is the best language I've got of my conviction, if I can put it that way, that divine love is meeting the need. And this is what it looks like right now. It's the best thing I've got. But it is divine love present meeting the need, or it wouldn't be here at all. So that I can relax and say, okay, on we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just would you say that your practice then of all of this is moment by moment as you go through your life, you have things come up, and maybe for a minute you indulge those things that come up, just like the picture as if it's real, and then you let it go? Or how does that look? What shape does that take in the way that you deal with things every day?
Well, I use a lot of times just that simple little, I look at it, thank you for sharing, but I know it's not causative. So I just let it be.
Yeah.
And Margaret Laird used to say of a lot of things, I don't know why it looks that way. The hell with it.
Right.
Because she would go right back to the fact. The fact is that all is infinite mind, infinitely manifest right here, right now. Perfect, whole, complete, joyous, free, satisfying, fulfilling, all of that.
Right.
That's what's going on.
Right.
The view of it, the way it looks to me, I can fuss with all I want, but it has no capacity to shift.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in CSR, Margaret Laird said in CSR on page 144, the word reflection for man means that each individual is his own life, truth, love, and wholly responsible for all that happens to him / her.
Yeah, it is that when something comes up, when a problem arises, when something shakes you up, interferes with what you think is smooth running, right then at that moment, right at that very moment, is the time when you decide, is that picture looking like that and upsetting everything? Is that causative?
Right.
Or is that occurring because I'm relying on the way things look?
Yeah.
If I'm building a house and I'm right in the middle of building the house and somebody comes along and says, you're running out of money. Now that can be pretty upsetting because here I've got a house under construction,
Yeah.
I'm running out of money. What do you mean I'm running out of money? And for a while there's that, oh dear. And then I think, wait a minute. This is not an efforting struggle to live. This is divine being, the best way I can see it. So there's something here that tells me that I'm relying on something outside of my own consciousness called money to have this happen. And that's not what makes it happen. That money shows up because the house is being built. It's part of the picture. It's not causative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So right away, when the problem shows up, number one, I know right away, Betty, somehow you're depending on something you're seeing or dealing with out here in this picture as if it were causative. Stop it. That's the way I talk to myself.
Yeah.
And I look around to see what it is I'm hanging on to that I think makes such a difference, because I know it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it'll be a monkey wrench in the works if I hang on to it.
Right.
And sometimes
And
when
how
he
does that change?
points something out to me, and that makes the difference.
Right. And how does that change? How has that changed as you've gotten older? I know that as you hit your 90s, and now you're 94, as you hit that, you've seen different challenges. How does that show up differently? Is it harder to let things be? Or does it take more discipline?
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes. It's amazing how unwilling we are. Right.
I was willing yesterday for all of this, but not for that.
That's right. Like I don't play tennis anymore or any of those things. And darn it, I'd like to play tennis. Why can't I play tennis? I should be able to play tennis. It's not fair. That kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that comes up all the time. Or somebody comes along and says, "Boy, you look great for your age." And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to look like? And that's a real bugaboo.
Yeah.
How
about when you have
challenges are different, that's all.
Right. I'll call one. How about when you think you can't deal with all this technology? So therefore you
terrible.
Just throw in the towel.
You talk about being relying on the past. Well, if I had this technology when I was in high school, or even when I was in college, I could have dealt with it, but it didn't come along until I was in my 60s or something. What do you think? As if I couldn't learn anything at the age of 60, but I could have learned it when I was 20.
Right.
And heavenly, what do you do when you're 90? You can't learn anything new. Oh, yes, you can. And you do all the time.
Right.
But it is harder to tackle that at that stage. And it is a challenge all the time. One of the blessings I have is that I have two kids that knew how to do all that stuff with that technology. And so I think, good, I grew a world with kids that know how to do this. Take it over.
Right.
But I also have one that says, yes, you do know, Mother, you can take care of that.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. And that's for sure. But I also know that to the degree that I confront it with the fact of what's going on, instead of relying on the feedback, there's always an answer. And on we go. And it comes up again, and we work it through the same way.
So it's a continuous willingness.
Well, I'll tell you, the little saying that I've used it with you, so you've heard it before. But if you are committed to something, all you have to do is keep your word.
Yeah. So if you're committed to science, all you have to do is continue with the practice.
And the thing I've learned is that for each one, it's different. It's unique for each one. There isn't a duplicate anywhere. So you can find it in the magazines, you can find it in a TV show, you can find it walking down the sidewalk, you can find it sitting in the kitchen. It doesn't make any difference. You will grow the language that speaks to you and trust it when it comes along. Just don't insist that everybody else do it exactly that way, because they won't, they can't. There's no duplicate anywhere, believe it or not.
Right. So as one final statement around practice, self-responsibility, commitment, what's the one thing you want to leave people with?
Stay with it.
Yeah.
Stay with it. When you find something that works for you, that answers those questions for you. It gives you peace and joy and power. Stay with it.
All right. And that's all we have tonight. And we've gotten a couple of hearts and loves and thumbs up and things like that. And I just want to thank you guys for being here. And again, let us know any questions, just put them in the comments and all of that. And we will look and see what we can do. If you have a session that you would love to have covered, a topic that you would love to have covered, please let us know. And if this has made any kind of a difference for you, we would also love, I don't know what I'm doing here. We'd also love, we're a nonprofit organization, the Institute of Metaphysical Science. You can go to our site, scientificmetaphysics.org, and you can subscribe to the Rethink Quarterly, which is what the article is we quoted. There's other events and things that you can participate with, or any kind of materials.
Lots of other articles.
That's right, materials that you can purchase that we quote from every week. And then also, just know that we're a charitable organization supported by donations and things like that. So if that is what speaks to you, we would love that as well. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. See you again this time, same Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central and 5 p.m. Pacific. And until then, keep practicing.